everyone, and welcome back to my channel. If you're new here, my name is Sam, and today I thought I'd have a bit of a chat about Goodreads, or more specifically the Goodreads Choice Awards, because this week Goodreads have announced the first round nominees for their Choice Awards. And I haven't actually seen the full list yet because I wanted to kind of try and capture my reaction on film. But I've been using Goodreads for about 5 years. I think I actually set up my Goodreads account in 2015. And for anyone who doesn't know, Goodreads is basically a website where you can track and rate and review all of the books that you're reading. And every year they do these Choice Awards where people can vote for the books that they think are the best new releases for that year. The awards have had a little or a lot of criticism in the past, simply because the way that the voting system is set up, you don't actually have to have read a book to be able to vote for it. And so sometimes what you find is that if there are any books on the list that are popular or that are by really well-known authors, then they quite often end up winning simply because a lot of people, when they come to vote, they recognise those books. And sometimes you actually find that a winning book has more votes than it actually has ratings on Goodreads. And it seems kind of weird because Goodreads as a platform is a ratings platform where you rate books out of 5. And so surely it would make more sense to take the existing ratings from people that have read the books and use that to kind of pick the winners. But anyway, yeah, that was a bit of a tangent. I think what I'm going to do in this video is go through all of the nominees for each category. Maybe not all the categories, because I think there's about 20 different categories. So I think I'm just going to go through the genres that I read a lot of and just kind of have a chat about the books that I've read and whether there's any books that I think have the potential to win, and if there's any books that I would like to read and that I'm going to be adding to my TBR. Okay, so I've got the website up on my phone and I'm going to scroll down, and I think the first category I'm going to look at is just general fiction. And straight away, I don't actually think I've read any of these. Oh no, wait, I have. I've read The Midnight Library by Matt Haig. I'm actually not surprised to see that on here. I read an arc of this back in August and it is really good. It was really weird because I read it before it was officially released, and then it came out and suddenly it was hitting all the bestseller lists and everyone was talking about it, and I can definitely see why, because it is a really good book. I think I gave it 4 stars. It's basically about a library that's kind of in between life and death, where every single book has a story or an alternative history based on decisions that you almost made, but it deals a lot with mental health. And the writing is quite subtle and it's almost gentle, I think is the word that I'd use to describe it. It wasn't a very long book from what I can remember, but I think I read it in like a day or maybe 2 days, because it was one of those books where I couldn't put it down. So if I keep on scrolling down, American Dirt, I'm pretty sure I have that on my Kindle. I think I picked it up in a 99p deal, but I don't actually know a lot about what it's about. My Dark Vanessa is also on here, which I read this month. I finished it, I think it was last week or the week before, and I'm going to be mentioning it in my October wrap-up, which should be coming this weekend or next week. But yeah, I can completely understand why that's on here too, because it's one of those books that really makes you think. I actually found it really hard to give this book a rating because there was nothing that I could fault about the writing, but it's such an uncomfortable book that I would feel uncomfortable if people decided to read it based on my recommendation. If you don't know the story, it's about a woman called Vanessa who is kind of in her early 30s, and when she was 15 she had a relationship with her 40-year-old English teacher, and the book kind of flicks back and forth between Vanessa as a teenager and Vanessa as an adult, where we see the impact that the abuse actually had on her, even though at the time she didn't see it like that and she thought that she was experiencing this kind of love affair. The book obviously has quite a lot of trigger warnings, and like I said, I feel really weird about recommending it, but I know that it's become so popular, and I feel like if you're interested in reading it, then you have to kind of know what you're getting yourself into, because there are some parts of the book where it doesn't hold back, and because it's told in the first person from Vanessa's perspective, you get to see inside her head and you get to see how she experiences certain situations. Even though it's fiction, it felt so realistic, and it's so heartbreaking how frustrating it is to see inside her mind and how much this man manipulated her. Okay, so next on the list is Anxious People by Frederick Bachman, which I've never actually read any books by Frederick Bachman. I know that he's he's a Swedish author and a lot of his books have been translated into English. I've got quite a few on my TBR, but I haven't actually read any of them yet. But I'm not surprised to see that on the list because I know that he is a really popular author. Oh, okay, so Such a Fun Age is also on the list, and this is a book that I thought it had come out at the end of last year, but maybe it did come out at the beginning of this year. It basically follows two women. We have a young black woman who works as a babysitter for a wealthy white woman who is kind of like a lifestyle blogger, and one evening she asks her babysitter to take one of her children out for a walk just to kind of like get her out of the house. They've got a bit of a family situation going on, and so the babysitter agrees and she takes her to this supermarket nearby where she's stopped by a security guard and accused of kidnapping this child that she's babysitting. And Amira, the babysitter, really wants to just kind of let the situation drop and not really push it, but Alex, who's the mum, feels really guilty and is almost kind of like determined to make things right, even though that's not what Amira wants. And one of the main themes that is running through the book is white saviorism and kind of highlighting that. Okay, so those are all of the books that I've read in the general fiction category. I'm actually quite surprised to see that The Vanishing Half isn't on this list. I'm pretty sure that was published this year, and that's another book that I read a few weeks ago and really loved, and it definitely deserves to be on this list, so I'm quite surprised that it isn't. Okay, so I think I'm going to change the category and I'm going to go for mystery and thriller next, which I'm pretty sure I've read quite a lot of mystery and thrillers this year, so hopefully there's going to be a few on the list that I'll have read. But I've just noticed the first one is You Are Not Alone by Greer Hendricks and Sarah Peckenham, and I haven't read this and I don't think I'm going to because I read An Anonymous Girl, which is by the same authors, right at the start of the year back in January, and I really didn't like it. It was just not my kind of thriller. It was really confusing and half of the book was told in the second person perspective. So yeah, it's kind of put me off from reading anything else by them. Oh, okay, so One by One by Ruth Ware is also on the list, and I haven't read this book, but I've read one of Ruth Ware's other books, The Turn of the Key. I read it early this year and absolutely loved it. I think it's probably my favourite thriller that I've read this year. I have heard mixed reviews on some of her other books, but I do want to eventually get round to this. I think it's set in a ski resort, but that's pretty much all I know, and that might even be completely wrong. Next on the list is The Guest List by Lucy Foley, and I really didn't like this book, which I know is probably going to be a bit of an unpopular opinion, but I read this before it came out. I actually got an ARC through NetGalley and it was okay. I think I gave it 3 or 3.5 stars, but it just kind of felt a bit average to me. Lucy Foley has a habit of writing these really awful characters, and even though the story and the plot and the murder mystery aspect to her books are really quite clever, if I don't care about the characters because they're all just really awful, then I'm just not going to connect with the story. But I'm not actually surprised to see that on here because I know that a lot of other people really loved that book. Okay, so a lot of these books I haven't actually read. Harlan Coben I have heard of but haven't read that book. The Sundown Motel actually I've got on my Kindle. I picked it up recently and I think it was a 99p Kindle deal, and I would like to read it at some point. Same with Home Before Dark by Riley Sager. That is also quite high on my list. I'm planning to read Lock Every Door, which is also by Riley Sager, in November because I've heard really good things about that too. When No One Is Watching by Alyssa Cole is another book that I've definitely heard of, and I'm pretty sure I've heard good reviews, so I would maybe consider reading it. And the last book on the list is The Devil in the Dark Water, which I think is by the same author who wrote The 7.5 Deaths of Evelyn Hardcastle. Is that what it's called? I do want to read that at some point, but I've heard so many different reviews, like so many mixed opinions, that it's one of those that was quite high on my TBR, but then I've kind of like bumped it down a little bit because I'm not sure whether I'd actually enjoy it. Okay, so the next category I think I'm going to go for is fantasy, although I don't know how many of these I'm actually going to have read because I've only recently started getting back into fantasy, like this year, and so I've got kind of a massive backlog of books that came out years and years ago that I really want to read before I read any new fantasy releases. But let's have a look, and the first on the list is The Burning God, and I'm not surprised to see that on here. I haven't read The Poppy War yet, but it's really high on my list because I've heard so many people say that it's really really good. And I also actually included it in my 5-star book predictions because I think I'm gonna love it. So the next couple of books on the list I have definitely heard of. I don't know if I'm really interested in reading them though. They just don't really seem like my kind of thing. That's The House on the Cerulean Sea and A Deadly Education. Oh, okay, so we have got House of Earth and Blood by Sarah J. Maas on this list, which is also on my November TBR. I haven't got around to reading it yet, but I've heard really good things and I am hoping that I'm going to love it. I think it has the potential to be a new favourite, but I've also heard mixed reviews and I don't know why I'm talking like this, but yeah, I'm interested to see what I think of that. Okay, so there are quite a few books on here that I do really want to read, like Empire of Gold is the 3rd book in the Daevabad trilogy, and I haven't read any of that series, but I've heard so many people talking about it, and I'm pretty sure my cousin read it over the summer and really enjoyed it. And so it's one of those where I really want to get around to it at some point. The Invisible Life of Addie LaRue is also on here, which I don't think anyone is going to be surprised about. I know that that is a book that has been getting so much hype recently. I do want to read it. I haven't read anything by V. Schwab before, but I know that her books are super popular and I know that so many people seem to be loving this book and I want to know what all of the hype is about. That is literally the only reason why I want to read this, is because I feel like I need to know what everyone is talking about. Okay, so of the books on the list, I have read a grand total of 0, which, considering that I always say that fantasy is one of my favourite genres, I don't know whether that's surprising or not, because like I said, I have only recently started getting back into fantasy, and so a lot of the fantasy books that I've been reading are those that have been out for quite a while. I've kind of been prioritising those over new releases, but yeah, there are quite a few books on here that I want to read, so hopefully I'll get round to them eventually. So the next category I'm going to look at is romance, and I don't know how many romance books I've actually read this year. Just having a quick look, I haven't read the first 2, 3, 4, 5 books on the list, but I have read One to Watch by Kate Stayman London. This is actually one of my favourite romance books that I've read this year. It's about a plus-size blogger who is a big fan of this TV show, which kind of sounds similar to The Bachelor or The Bachelorette, and she writes this article basically slamming the show for its lack of diversity, and this post goes viral, and so the producers on the show invite her to be the star of the next series. And I think I actually gave this book 5 stars. I really enjoyed it. There are a few trigger warnings, which make sure you check those out before you go into the book, but I really liked the message that the book was trying to get across, and I really liked the main character. It was basically like watching a reality TV show but reading it instead, if that makes sense. The next book on the list I have also read, and that was Beach Read by Emily Henry, and this is about 2 rival authors who are both struggling with writer's block, and they end up living in neighbouring beach huts over the summer, and to kind of help each other get through writer's block, they decide to switch genres, and they end up taking each other on these dates to kind of research their new books that they're going to be writing. And I really liked the banter between the characters. I was really surprised by how much I liked this book, because I went into it thinking that it was going to be very kind of fluffy, and it's there on the title. I thought it was going to be like a beach read, like one that you didn't really have to think about, but it did end up really surprising me, and I'm not surprised actually to see it on this list because I know that a lot of people also really enjoyed it. Okay, so this is really interesting because one of the books on the list is In 5 Years by Rebecca Searle, which is one of my favourite books that I've read this year. I think I read it in January and I gave it 5 stars, absolutely loved it. But I do not think that this is a romance book, like, at all. And I really wouldn't want people to go into it thinking that it's a romance, because that's what I did. I went into it thinking that it was going to be like a romance, and it wasn't. For anyone who doesn't know this book, it's basically about a woman called Danny who has this dream where she wakes up to find that 5 years have passed and she's in a completely different apartment with a guy who is not her fiance. And it kind of really throws her, but she wakes up an hour later back in her normal life and is kind of like, oh, okay, that was a bit weird, but she carries on. And then the story flicks forward to 4.5 years later, where she meets this guy from her dream. I don't know if I've explained that very well, but like I said, you'd think from the blurb going into it that it is going to be a romance book, but it's really not. So yeah, I don't know how I feel about that being on the list. So I have actually read quite a few of these because I've also read The Switch by Beth O'Leary, which is the last book on the list. and I really like Beth O'Leary's books. She's actually got another book that's coming out next year, I think it is. She's the same author that wrote The Flat Share, which I think came out last year and was one of my favourite books that I read last year. And a lot of people have said that The Switch isn't as good as The Flat Share, and I can kind of see why, but for me personally, I absolutely loved The Switch. In fact, I think that I actually preferred the storyline to the storyline in The Flat Share. Okay, so I think I'm going to finish by just looking through the debut novel category, and Cemetery Boys by Aidan Thomas is top of the list, which I haven't read yet, but I've heard really good things about. Such a Fun Age by Kylie Reid is also on here, as is My Dark Vanessa and One to Watch. So those are, I think, the only books on the debut author category that I've actually read. And it's been really hard actually filming this video because I don't know if I've read enough of the books from each category to predict what I think is going to win. I've only really read kind of 3 or 4 books from each, sometimes even less than that. But I feel like there are so many books within those categories that I haven't read yet, but I want to read because I know that so many people loved them. I don't know, I'm not gonna lie, I feel a little bit confused. But yeah, I hope you've enjoyed this video. If you've made it this far, I hope it turns out okay, because I've been filming this for over an hour. I've never actually filmed a video like this before, so I don't know how it's going to turn out. But if you did enjoy it, then please don't forget to give it a thumbs up and click subscribe if you haven't already. I will also leave links to my social media in the description if you would like to check those out, and I will see you in the next video. Bye!